Let's talk about the big stimulus news this morning. Holy smokes, breaking news overnight from the White House. Bloomberg News breaking this story, and the Trump administration is preparing a $1 trillion infrastructure proposal plan. Now, how will this all tie together to the broader stimulus package? Remember, this is not just the whole stimulus. This would be a section of a stimulus plan. Would it be rolled together with the HEROES Act? We're not sure. But take a look at this. This is breaking news from Bloomberg overnight that the Trump team is weighing this $1 trillion for infrastructure to spur the economy. Now, look, this jumps ahead of what Democrats had wanted. Democrats wanted $500 billion for their stimulus plan for infrastructure, for roads and bridges, etc. This far exceeds that. The Trump administration has been hoping for a bipartisan infrastructure plan for a long time to fix our bridges, to fix our roads, to fix a lot of the crumbling infrastructure across the United States. I used to live in Philadelphia. You go to the South Street Bridge, it goes down to South Street, Philadelphia, where you get some good cheesesteaks. You stand under that bridge, you're seeing like clumps of stuff like falling all over your head. So America desperately needs that. We just saw another round of dams collapsing. Remember, we saw the flooding just a few short days ago up in Michigan. So we're seeing all of these major problems with infrastructure across the country, and many of our bridges, about 60%, need massive infrastructure fixes. So that's great. How will we pay for it? And how will this help us more broadly during the stimulus? Let me go through some of the details here. The Department of Transportation would reserve most of the money for traditional infrastructure work, like roads and bridges, but would also set aside funds for 5G, wireless infrastructure, and rural broadband. So 5G, I'm really curious about that piece of it. We don't have all the details. But what would that do for the telecom companies? You know, when Sprint or Verizon wants to run fiber, wants to put in all of these different cell towers, would they be providing the infrastructure, getting into these rural areas? We saw many millions of Americans home. We saw about 12 million Americans that don't have access to Wi-Fi, don't have access to broadband, don't have internet. So when they were sent home and couldn't go to school, they actually set up buses in the parking lots of their schools for Wi-Fi hotspots. So the parents could drive in their cars, sit in the car with their kids that didn't have access to internet, and get access to internet in the parking lot from the bus on a Wi-Fi hotspot. Can you imagine? Not only how terrible that is for the children to have to sit and try to learn math and reading in the car, but for the parents that then aren't able to go to work, they're having to then sit in a car with their 3 kids for hours. I would go crazy. I would go crazy. So rural broadband absolutely is important. I think it's to me, it's really one of the most important utilities we have, just like electricity and water. To have rural broadband, great. But the problem with a lot of these programs and an infrastructure plan is that it takes a long time for us to reap the rewards. So if we're looking for an injection of money, of capital into the economy right now to really get us rolling, this really is probably not going to help. Let's listen to Yael Selfin. She's a chief economist with KPMG, and she's been analyzing the potential for an infrastructure plan. Listen to what she had to say about this last night.
Well, it really just depends on how advanced plans are, because with large infrastructure projects, it takes time to plan and to actually get shovel ready, if you like, get actually the actual action going. So in that sense, they may take a little bit more time, but actually when it comes to the longer term productivities, it may be very useful. It may be just what the economy needs. Now, if you look at this crisis, for example, where we see that the main emphasis is going to be more on the telecommunication infrastructure rather than the transport infrastructure and the way we're going to do work more in the future, there may be especially in places like the UK, I need to focus more on telecommunication infrastructure rather than transport infrastructure.
So telecommunications could be far more interesting, far more important than just regular roads and bridges. Think about that for a second. We are now in this economy where going and getting a rural broadband set up is more important perhaps than roads and bridges. We saw this during the pandemic, right? How many people were home? And we're relying on internet. We saw the demand. We saw that Netflix was rolling back quality. Disney Plus was rolling back the quality of their shows just so we could have more broadband across the country. Things held up pretty well. We had some outages here. We had some delays, New York City and other spots for a little bit, but mostly we did pretty well. But isn't that amazing to think that the future of our infrastructure is more related to the information superhighway than it is to our actual highways? I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. So, President Trump is scheduled to have this meeting on Thursday to discuss the rural broadband access at the White House event on Thursday. House Democrats, of course, have offered their $500 billion proposal to renew infrastructure funding over 5 years. It's unclear, though, how long this administration's draft would authorize spending or how it would pay for these programs, because an existing U.S. infrastructure funding law is already set up for renewal by September 30th. So what will happen to that existing law? Will this be on top of that September 30th bill? We don't know. But there's two big problems with this that I see with an infrastructure plan. Two big problems. Number one is shovel-ready projects. Shovel-ready. Remember this during the Obama administration when we had those stimulus ideas, those infrastructure plans that came about in the first few months after President Obama took over for what was that disaster? When he was coming into office, we had just gone through this massive disaster under President George W. Bush. And he comes into office and he started putting this infrastructure incentive plan together where we would get out there with these shovel-ready projects. Now, I remember being on the air and heavily criticizing these shovel-ready projects because they weren't shovel-ready. And a lot of them were big sort of bailout packages. You remember Solyndra? Do you remember these other solar companies? There were all of these sort of, back scratching of and lining people's pockets, lobbyists' pockets, with these different shovel-ready projects. So a lot to be unpacked here. In a $1 trillion plan, how many, let's be honest, how many of you watching right now think that none of the president's buddies would get access to some shovel-ready projects? How many members of Congress would have buddies back home in their districts that would get access to shovel-ready projects? I mean, and I guarantee you there's going to be scandals that would emerge from this. $1 trillion. You're going to look back and say, how did that company manage to get that new fence contract? That's interesting. We're going to see a lot of problems with this. So that's the first issue, is that these shovel-ready projects aren't really even ready for many years. They take a long time. We were told that a lot of those projects under Obama were shovel-ready projects. They weren't. So nothing was happening. The money was there. It wasn't stimulating the economy like we need it to. The second big issue is, who the heck is going to pay for it? Are you going to increase gas taxes to pay for it? Are you going to just add more debt because right now we can afford it? And so now is a good time for the U.S. to just borrow money because it's at 0% interest? That's probably what's going to happen. We're not going to rob Peter to pay Paul. We're not going to take from the Social Security Trust Fund or some other place or raise gas taxes or increase payroll taxes. We know that's not going to happen. So who's going to pay for it? We're just going to go further into debt. Over $20 trillion in debt. We'll just keep adding on top of it for this $1 trillion stimulus package. So again, how will this come together? We heard this week that the White House wants a $2 trillion stimulus plan. Is $1 trillion of that going to be this infrastructure plan? We don't know. On Thursday, though, during that meeting, we will learn more about that, and I will bring that news to you. The other big piece of the stimulus news this morning is the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve is now stepping in to buy additional corporate bonds, and this is a big deal. They've already bought billions of dollars in junk bonds. The Federal Reserve is now stepping in and buying all sorts of corporate debt. This is really important because this is all the stuff that Wall Street doesn't want. These are companies that have problems. These are companies that on March 26th or later had to show that under the coronavirus they got hit hard. Airlines, other industries that got slammed during the coronavirus. Now they have a hardship. They've got all of this debt just to stay afloat. And what is the Federal Reserve doing? We'll take your debt off your back. Give it to us. We'll buy it. So what happened yesterday, of course? Well, Wall Street exploded with jubilation again. Stocks went up, soared as a result of it. No wonder, right? In after hours trading, I was watching this unfolding. Why is Wall Street suddenly going up? Oh, That's because the Federal Reserve has stepped in to say they're going to be buying more of these junk bonds. Now, the big difference here, and hopefully this doesn't make you, fall asleep like Grover when I talk about the Federal Reserve. These things are obviously very important, but you've got to think about that they don't really ever talk about this stuff. They don't really ever talk about buying up specific businesses, and that's what they're doing this time. Instead of buying up stocks like ETFs or index funds, they're buying up actual company bonds. That's big. And they're going to basically have an auditing program that's going to pick and choose. And they're basically saying, hey, if you're a company that's hurting right now, we're going to buy up your debt for you. Wow. And now they're picking and choosing. They're going to go through the auditing process to see if you can prove that you're a, quote, fallen angel, as they refer to them, meaning after March 26th, when the bottom fell out, were you hurt after that? If this is something from December, pre-coronavirus, sorry, you're not a part of this. You also have to be a company with a good credit rating. So they have credit rating levels, and they also have to prove that they were hit hard by the coronavirus. They have announced an additional $750 billion to bail you out, to bail out these companies. And by the way, the Fed is going to be holding its big meeting this afternoon. So we will bring you news from that later today. That's set to happen at 10 a.m. Eastern. So actually, just in a short amount of time here. So we will bring you any updates from that Fed meeting later today and Jerome Powell. So these are big news pieces in the stimulus package. Remember, on the one side, you have Mitch McConnell, who wants a $1 trillion stimulus from the Senate. On the other side, you have the House Democrats that passed a $3 trillion HEROES Act. Infrastructure spending, state and local government spending, all kinds of stuff in between. The president announcing, well, according to Bloomberg and White House sources who are telling Bloomberg, who wanted to remain quiet for fear of losing their job, that President Trump this week is going to roll out a $1 trillion stimulus for infrastructure. But he also wants $2 trillion for a stimulus package. So again, we don't have answers on that. Is it $1 trillion for infrastructure plus another $2 trillion for direct stimulus payments to you, the American people? We don't know. But it looks like the White House is leaning more and more towards direct stimulus payments to you, probably in the form of another $1,200 check. There's a number of proposals that are floating through right now where that is looking more and more likely, especially given the size of what the White House is calling for. $2 trillion, and it's an election year, and they can show that they've got these big projects they can work on. I just hope as part of this infrastructure, there's not a whole bunch of money in there for a border wall. And what cozy lobbyists are going to get their hands on those contracts? So we'll see what's in this bill. But once again, Wall Street is happy. The Federal Reserve steps in, is able to help these companies which have been hit hard. Where is our Congress stepping in to help you? We have viewers right now on the show today who can't pay their medications. We featured Forrest right here on the show, for his GoFundMe that we have in the link below. He was trying to raise $650. We're hoping by the end of today's show that we'll be able to hit that for him. He's unable to pay his medications. And yet the Fed can just swoop in, buy up these bonds, help out all of these big businesses. And this is what happens, right? That's why big businesses are just too big to fail. And the government will step in and take care of them. But you and me, the little guys just hanging out, we have no stimulus money coming in, lost your jobs, can't pay medications, can't pay your rent, no help for rental assistance right now. I mean, that's what these companies are doing. They're going into debt to pay their rent. They're going into debt to try to pay payroll. And the Federal Reserve is coming in and buying up their debt. Imagine that for the American people. Let me know in the chat what you think about this. I'd be curious your comments on the infrastructure plan as well as this new round of Federal Reserve stimulus money buying up these corporate bonds. And again, the Fed holding their meeting today will bring you that news. And President Trump on Thursday having a discussion about this rural broadband initiative as well as infrastructure. So some big news starting to happen here, even though the Senate is about to take its vacation. So we won't get any kind of vote on a big stimulus until the end of July when they're back from their beach vacation enjoying some Mai Tais. I do want to tell you about a brand new newsletter that we've rolled out, and I would love for all of you to subscribe. It's just go to our website at Morning, M-O-R-N-I-N-G. It's right in the description below, morninginvest.com. It's a simple page, and it's an email newsletter that we will publish multiple times per week. And it's just about the news that we're following here about, investing, about real estate, about personal finance, the stories that, mean a lot to me that I think should mean a lot to you as well. So subscribe, join our free newsletter. It would mean a lot to me. So thank you so much for subscribing to the channel. I really appreciate that.